Hello everyone, welcome to another movie discussion video. Today's movie that we'll be discussing is The Godfather, that was released in 1972, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. I'm happy to say that I'm joined today by Jerome Keith, based in LA, and Brian, who's based in New York. Happy that you guys are on the show here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So what I'll do, I'll just give a brief breakdown of the video. But before we do that, we'll just give a quick introduction to ourselves, just in terms of what we do and our various passions and our various hobbies as well. So I'll kick things off. My name is Sonny Docchia. I have a movie blog website called Hollywood Town. So I do movie reviews, past and present, across a variety of genres. I have a top 5 series on actors, composers, and directors. And I also do opinion pieces from time to time as well, with regards to a variety of aspects on the Hollywood industry. So if you guys want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at town_Hollywood. You can also follow me on Instagram, that's hollywood.town, and the same profile username for Facebook as well. And I also have a YouTube channel as well called Hollywood Town. So if you enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and hit the notification bell for updates on the latest videos. So I'll pass it to Jerome now. Why don't you introduce yourself? And then, Brian can follow suit.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Jerome Keith, based in LA, running a company called Amateur Overlords that makes comics, short films, and podcasts and everything in between. We just dropped our first comic last month. The second issue of that comic should be coming next month. And a company that I work with a lot, Tall Order Productions, is dropping a short film tomorrow that should be good on their Instagram. So you can find them at Tall Order Productions. You can find my company at Amateur Overlords, and you can find me on Twitter at Amateur Jerome.
Awesome. And Brian, why don't you introduce yourself for the folks watching?
All right. Hi, my name is Brian Frosty. Like Sonny, I also have a movie blog. It's called Movies on Trial. You can find us at moviesontrial.com. We're also on Twitter, where we're at moviesont, as in MOVIESONT. You can follow me on Twitter at Brian Frosty, BRIANFROSTI. I currently review scripts and provide feedback and coverage for Coverfly, and work on my own screenwriting. Got a few scripts out in contests, so fingers crossed. And you can also find some of my writing on Screen Rant, as well as The Gamer and Comic Book Resource. Yeah, that's it for me.
Cool. Awesome. So just to give a breakdown to the video as well, and just before I do that, you'll find my social media channels as well as Jerome's and Brian's in the YouTube description below. So be sure to follow them whenever you get the chance. So just to give a breakdown of the video, the first section that we'll be talking about is the story and the screenplay. That'll then be followed by the acting and the characters involved. We'll then discuss the direction of the movie. That'll then be followed by the soundtrack. We'll then give our overall thoughts on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being if we don't like the movie at all, and 10 being a classical masterpiece in our opinion of the movie. Also, just to be clear to our viewers, we'll also be using half numbers. So, for example, you can use 5.5, 6.5, for example, but those are the parameters when rating the movie. So, just to kick things off in terms of the summary of the plot. So, The Godfather is a gangster crime genre film, and it follows the Corleone family over a span of 10 years. It's essentially the transition of power from Vito Corleone, the father of the family, played by Marlon Brando, to one of his sons, Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino. And it's essentially the rise to power from Michael's position from a young, innocent man who was in the Marines to effectively being the head of the mafia for his family in terms of his criminal enterprise. So just to be clear to our viewers, there's a heavy spoiler warning for this video, so if you've not seen The Godfather, please save the video, put it to a side, and then once you've seen it, come back to the video. So just to kick things off in terms of the story, so I'll kick things off in terms of my thoughts. For me, one of the most intriguing aspects of the movie is how the movie juggles multiple storylines into a cohesive whole. A clear example being when we see Vito Corleone at the beginning of the movie. So he is the head of his family. He does whatever it takes to protect his family and his enterprise. But we see as the movie progresses and as he gets older, we find that there's going to be a transition of power from his dad to the son, Michael played by Al Pacino. And ultimately, that's one of the most fascinating aspects of the movie is the family dynamic of the film that runs throughout the entirety of its runtime. Particularly how, in the case of Vito and Michael, they care for their families and they'll do whatever it takes to protect them, no matter what. A great example being one of the scenes about halfway into the movie is when Vito Corleone has been shot by one of the rival gang members, we see that Michael Corleone is all alone in a hospital and he has to protect his father from being killed by the rival gang members. So he transfers his dad from one of the wards to another ward. And in that moment, in that scene, we see Michael really cares for Vito and he really cares for his dad and his safety. Another example being when Vito is at the head of the Five Families meeting towards the end of the movie, and he forgoes the murder of his son, Sonny. And again, another great example of how Vito does whatever it takes to protect his family, and in this case, making sure that Michael returns from his exile in a safe manner. So we'll start with you, Jerome, just in terms of the family dynamic of the movie. Do you think that plays well in terms of how it's presented in the movie, or do you think it could have been presented in a more sort of clear and concise manner, you reckon?
I think it plays out pretty efficiently, just because it's such an ensemble cast. Like immediately you're aware we're at a wedding for one of the daughters, and that's very important to us. Oh, and we have to meet the other two brothers that aren't our main character, and family becomes the most important thing very quickly. Like family is the only thing that can get Vito to essentially step out of his shell. I mean, that's the start of the movie. He'll do anything for anyone who asks just because this is the day of family. Like, the extended family becomes his family through that. Beyond that, I think it actually takes an interesting turn later on when family becomes less important as Michael becomes the head of it. Like, I think Michael does care about family to an extent, but slowly power becomes more important to him, especially as you see the relationship between him and Kay deteriorating to the point of that iconic last shot of her being closed out of his new life.
Brian, well, just in terms of the family dynamic that plays within the movie and particularly within the story, and I'm also aware that this is the first time watching that you obviously watched The Godfather as well, so I'm interested to see your thoughts just in terms of the story. Yeah, but what impression did it leave in terms of that aspect of the movie, and particularly, the family dynamic that plays pretty much throughout the entirety of the film?
All right, yes, it is true. I'm a first-time Godfather viewer. It's something, it's a classic, been on the list to get to for a while, so Sonny, thanks for pushing me to finally watch it.
Okay.
Yeah, the family dynamic is definitely fascinating in the movie, and like Jerome, you're talking about like how it's such an ensemble cast, and it's kind of incredible how cohesive it all feels, despite how much it jumps around. And to get to your point about Michael, I think it's the most interesting thing to me is the juxtaposition between Michael and Sonny, and that Michael is kind of this one that's been held up on a pedestal. They sent him to college. He was in the Marines. Vito at one point talks about how he was hoping that Michael would eventually become, Governor Corleone or Senator Corleone. And Sonny, on the other hand, is this very emotional, wears his heart on his sleeve kind of guy. And he's, his temper runs wild all the time, but he's been involved in the family business, as soon as he could walk. And so Sonny has developed this attachment to the family, whereas Michael has only ever been on the outside, only ever seen kind of the power of it and all the effects his father can have on the rest of the world. So when Sonny's calling the shots, you see him rushing off to go beat up his sister's abusive husband, which ultimately ends in a trap for him. But Michael is, it's all calculating. It's all about what the family can become rather than who the family currently is.
Another aspect of the movie that I wanted to touch upon, and it plays pretty much throughout the movie, is violence. Now, it's interesting because violence in gangster movies, it can go one or two ways. It can go really over the top, and it doesn't really serve the story, and it's just there for ticking the various tropes that you find in various gangster movies. Or in the case of Godfather, it's serving a purpose where the characters that do carry out violent acts do so with a specific purpose or a motive. A great example being when Luca Brasi is sent by Vito Corleone to infiltrate the Tattaglia family and I keep forgetting the other family. I think it's Barzini or one of the other rival families. But it's a great scene because in that moment you see the Tattaglia family and the other family are killing Luca Brasi as a way to send a message to the Corleone family, a sort of a message of intent saying, we're going to try and chip down your empire that you've built for so many years. And that's a great example of the violence serving a purpose rather than ticking the various tropes and stuff that you see in these sort of genre pieces, as it were. Another great example, and one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie, is when Michael lays out the plan of how to kill the corrupt cop, McCluskey, and Sollozzo. And it's a great example of how Michael's confidence in taking over the empire really pays off. The sense where he's not afraid to kill these quote-unquote evil people. And like I said, it goes back to giving the characters a specific purpose and a motive. In this case, Michael's looking to kill the corrupt cop because he'll got in the papers, because obviously the Corleone family have various newspaper people on payroll, so therefore it'll look good that he's killed a corrupt cop. And in the case of Sollozzo, wiping out one of the rival crime family members means that it's one less thing to worry about in terms of the competition, as it were, within the family business. But we'll start with you, Brian, just in terms of the violence and how it plays within the movie. Do you think it was done in a very specific way where the violent acts served a purpose, as it were? Or did you get an opposite opinion with regards to how it plays within the movie?
I think the violence definitely has some specific purposes. In my deep dive into The Godfather this last 48 hours, Coppola originally didn't want to make the movie because he thought it glorified violence and the mafia lifestyle, and it took a lot of convincing and angling to get him to actually take the job in the first place. And the movie originally didn't have all that much violence, and they had to add in a couple of scenes to appease the studios because they thought the lack of violence wasn't going to make the movie sell.
That's right, yeah.
In particular, the scene we've talked about where Sonny goes and beats up Connie's husband was, that was what saved Coppola's job, was adding that scene in. But yeah, so the violence, it never appears gratuitous to me in the movie. I think they do a good job of showing the cost of it, and that it's never the cost is either the human lives it's a tragedy, it's never a heroic moment, or there's a human cost to it in terms of the self. Whenever you see Michael either ordering violence or carrying out himself, he seems to lose a part of himself every time he does it. He isn't able to come out of the bathroom shooting when he's trying to kill off McCluskey. He has to sit down for a moment, and you can just see he has to let a part of himself go before he's able to pull the trigger. And then there's the famous baptism scene where it's just him, pretending to renounce the devil as he orders the deaths of all of his enemies, and just a little bit of him dies each time he says, "I do renounce it."
Jerome, well, in terms of your thoughts of the violence and how it plays within the story, do you think it was done in an organic way, or did you feel that it could have been done in a more sort of palatable way for the audience?
I think you guys have answered very well for how the violence organically comes out in the story. So I think I'm going to steal a note from Brian and go towards the metatextual narrative of it, especially because the production of The Godfather, this was one of the first modern day gangster films. So it's very interesting to look back at it and think, oh, things have changed so much. Now there are gangster films where it's just, oh, we're shooting people up because people like to see violence. But back then you really needed the excuse. It had to make sense, especially because the Hays Code had only ended 4 years before this released. So probably about 2 to 3 years before it was in production. So this type of violence couldn't really be shown on screen without it being censored or basically removed by the production board. This was the first opportunity for us to really get violence, and since that was such a change to the culture, that especially had to be warranted, because if you're just showing it nonsensical in 1972, a lot of people are going to have a lot different reaction than they do now, where
Sure.
we're just so used to the violence that it's like, oh, okay, that's how Bruce Willis gets out of this. He beats the shit out of everybody. But back then, it had to see Al Pacino shoot two guys in the face, you really needed to sell it. Now it's become such a common thing that I think it's watered down, but that was that was the first time that was even an ingredient in film for that audience.
Moving on to the acting and characters section of the discussion. So I'll kick things off. In terms of the cast that's within Godfather, it has without a doubt one of the best ensemble casts in the history of movies. Starting with Marlon Brando's performance as Vito Corleone, his method style of acting is definitely there for all to see, particularly with his distinct sort of mumbling accent that permeates throughout his performance and his absolute commitment to the role itself. He chews up the scenery in multiple scenes. One of my favourite scenes is where he's talking to the heads of the five families, and in that scene he gets upset where he tells basically the heads that if some accident befalls his son Michael, where if he's shot by a bolt of lightning or he hangs himself in his prison, that he's going to be really upset, and he's essentially telling the heads of the five families, I'm going to kill one of you, if not all of you, if something goes bad to my son, which I think is really clever. It's not on the nose. He kind of hints that he will do those sort of things, but without explicitly saying those words, which I thought was really powerful. And then we're going to the more dramatic aspects of Brando's performance, where, for example, we see he looks at his dead son, Sonny, at a morgue. And the famous quote is, look how they massacred my boy. And he does it in such an emotional way. It really hits deep in terms of how it's affected him. And you see that, whilst he is a ruthless leader for his family in terms of the acts of violence that he sort of sends in terms of what he does, it also, the acts of violence that occurred throughout the movie definitely have a negative impact on Vito, particularly in terms of Sonny's death. It really shakes him in a lot of ways. And it ensures that, he doesn't want Michael, his other son, to fall into the same sort of problems and pitfalls of being a sort of a leader in the mafia enterprise, as it were. But we'll start with you, Brian, just in terms of Marlon Brando's performance. Do you think it's as iconic as critics and audiences say, or are you one of the rebels, as it were, in terms of the opinion of Brando's performance in the movie?
I can just see Jerome's face here. I think he knows what I'm about to say. No, I don't think it's as iconic as is treated as. Marlon Brando is obviously an incredibly talented actor, and there are a number of excellent scenes, like the one you talked about, and even just when he's barely conscious, like a tear running down his eye in the hospital, looking up at Michael. He has a lot of great nonverbal acting, and maybe it's just because I'm new to the Godfather,
yeah,
but his performance is just so memeable. It's Don Corleone is just such a goofy way of speaking, and it's just such an easy impression to do. I've honestly had to fight the urge to just do a bad Marlon Brando impression this entire interview so far. And I'm like, did he have a stroke that I wasn't aware of? I'm not saying it's a bad performance. Obviously, it is a good performance, and it's a really odd and interesting one. But I don't think it's one that's gonna stick with me in terms of the greatest performances of all time.
Sure.
I don't think he's the best performance in the movie by any stretch. And just in doing a little research, he beat out both Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine for Sleuth, and that is ridiculous. Those are both incredible performances, particularly Olivier. And sorry, Marlon Brando, I don't think he added up.
Jerome, in terms of Marlon Brando's performance, are you in Brian's camp in terms of not as favourably liking it, or are you in most critics and audiences in terms of how sort of universally loved his performances within the movie?
Having never seen Sleuth, I can't tell you if he deserved the Oscar over Michael Caine. Yeah, but I think that to Brian's point, yeah, it's a very memeable performance, but I think that's kind of what made it iconic. whether or not it's definitely not in my top 5 of performances, but I think that's primarily. But I will say it's one of the performances that sticks with me. Like I always remember it, even if I don't remember a particular scene to him.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that voice, and I remember the way that he kind of like moves. Like it's just it. I mean, it is a meme. Like there's probably we could make that so many memes just for the fun of it. Like there's so many bad impressions of Vito Corleone. Like I'm gonna make you an offer you can't refuse. It's just like it's what anybody goes to when they want to talk about gangster movies. So I think he made that character for me. I couldn't imagine anybody else in it, and I know that Coppola had to like fight to get Brando into that role. So I'm happy he did, and I think that the movie probably wouldn't have been. I don't think it would have caught fire the same way, because this movie like really was a risk at the time they were making it. But
yeah,
I think that those performances, pretty much everyone's performance in the film, created iconic characters, and Brando, whether or not it was a great performance, created an iconic performance, like one that's going to like be everyone's favorite impression at some point.
I agree with that. Yeah, I don't want to have the internet coming for me as this guy hates Brando. I don't. I think it's a good and interesting performance. It's just not, it didn't live up to the hype in my mind.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Well, I feel like the hype makes you think it's going to be a completely different character. Like it makes you imagine scenes that just never happen.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Moving on to Al Pacino's performance as Michael Corleone. For me, he is the best performance in the movie in terms of single best performance. A lot of critics and audiences will go for Marlon Brando's performance, and rightly so. It's uniquely iconic and memorable. But in terms of the character arc, in terms of the journey that we follow from start to finish, it's definitely through Michael's perspective. At the beginning of the movie, we see him as a young, he's innocent, he's a war veteran, just come back from World War II. And it's interesting because at the beginning of the movie, Michael does everything possible to avoid being in the family business. There's even that line where he tells Kay at his sister's wedding, I'm not my father, I don't want to be in the business. It's very clear at the beginning that he does not want to be in his family's business at all. But as the movie progresses and as certain events unfold, like for example when Vito is shot and then he's in hospital, Michael's then forced to protect his father at all costs from the rival gang members. And then once Sonny is killed at the highway by the various patrolmen and the rival gang members, it then really forces his hand to become the leader of his family, as it were. So it's a really interesting and complex character arc because we see this young innocent person become this ruthless individual, as it were. Particularly, the scene where he kills Captain McCluskey and Solozzo at the restaurant. And one of my favorite shots in the movie is when the camera pans in towards Pacino's face, and we see his eyes sort of dotting around. It's almost that last bit of humanity left in his character before he kills these two people. It's the last bit of innocence left in him before he shoots the individuals in question. And I think with Pacino's performance, it's the less is more technique. It could have, in the hands of the wrong director, or if the screenplay wasn't written properly, it could have very easily veered into sort of over-the-top, mustache-twirling villain that we've seen in countless of these genre pieces. But Al Pacino does a fantastic job of doing a lot with very little, as it were, being very subtle with his emotions. Another favourite scene of mine is when he's laying out the plan to the Corleone family of how he's going to kill McCluskey and Solozzo. Again, we see a slow zoom in into Pacino's face. And there's a lot of restraint and a lot of calmness in his performance. Again, doing the less is more, which I think is really powerful. But we'll start with you, Jerome, in terms of Al Pacino's performance. Did you get that sense that he's got the most satisfying character arc within the movie? And what were your sort of overall impressions of Al Pacino's performance?
I think he has the most complete character arc within the movie.
Yeah.
For me, like the most satisfying character arc is probably Sonny, just because I enjoy that flat character arc of this is what anger gets you. But for Pacino's character arc, well, just his performance in general, I think that he does a fantastic job with what he's given. The script very much so calls for someone to have restraint, especially because there's never really a moment where Michael takes time to talk with somebody about how he's feeling.
Yeah.
There's no discussion of, oh, I just shot two guys in the face. That was messed up. It's just him constantly moving forward and doing what he does best, which is kind of being his father. And you can see that in a lot of the cinematography and the way that they light Pacino almost the exact same way as Brando, especially after Brando gets injured that first time. After that, like when he's in the hospital, the darkness is taking over him, and you can just see all the shadows on his face. And it's so specific in, okay, he looks like his dad. He's supposed to have the feeling that this could be the next one, whereas Sonny clearly doesn't look like his father. What's the third one's name? It's slipping me.
Fredo.
Fredo just is a disappointment in general, it seems. And then like the adopted fourth son, Tom Hagen, just isn't willing to do what is necessary. Like he's willing to talk to people, but when it comes to the conversation where they're having, okay, I have to go kill these guys because if I don't, Dad's gonna get assassinated. Hagen is the one preaching for maybe we should slow down rather than Sonny, who's kind of like you can tell Sonny wants it done, but he doesn't think Michael can do it. Like he's like, you're a civilian, what are you gonna do?
Brian, with regards to Al Pacino's performance, do you think it's as iconic as people say it is? And what were your impressions? Especially, obviously, this is the first time you saw the movie. What did you take seeing Pacino's performance for the first time, as it were?
Yeah, Al Pacino lived up to the hype in my mind. Like, I think you hit the nail on the head. He has this really, like, understated energy to him where you're just kind of, like, constantly drawn in even when he's refusing to take up the mantle early in the movie. Like, you can kind of tell that just, like, there's really no one, like, right from that first wedding scene, there's really no one who could possibly be the next Godfather other than him. And the movie does a really interesting job where it's like, despite being like such a long and methodical movie, like Michael is kind of, his character arc is really fast. Like it's really, he's, as soon as Vito gets shot, he's kind of swept up in this whirlwind that, it's kind of taken out of his hands. He's like, all right, well, now I have to protect my father. Now I have to go and kill these people before they bring in more harm to my family. Now I have to run away. And he's just then, at that point, he's so cemented into this mafia lifestyle that there's never really a thought of him turning back. It seems like he finds himself an Italian wife. He takes to commanding his bodyguards really well. And, by the time he's returned, like, though the other characters don't seem to understand it right away, he's undergone this whole metamorphosis and just carries himself so much more menacingly upon his return to the United States. Yeah, there's a lot of like really subtle, really fun things about Pacino's performance.
Moving on to the direction of the movie, this is one of Francis Ford Coppola's best directed movies in his vast filmography. And the reason why I think that is because every scene feels important to either developing the story or developing the characters. In my opinion, at no point in the movie do you get the sense where a scene should have been cut out or they could have expanded upon a scene. Every scene sends, it evokes a specific purpose and motive within the movie. Two clear examples being at the beginning of the movie when we see Johnny Fontaine, who's clearly based off Frank Sinatra in real life. We see that he's sort of down on his luck. He can't get a role in a Hollywood picture. And because Vito is the head of a mafia family, he's got all these connections, he sends Tom Hagen off to Los Angeles to talk to the head of the studio, Jack Waltz. He refuses once Tom Hagen proposes that Johnny Fontaine should be in the movie. And as we all famously know, because of Jack's refusal to take Johnny in the movie, we see the famous shot of the severed horse head lying in the bed, and we see Jack Waltz shouting and screaming. And it was sort of parodied and spoofed in countless cartoons and movies and TV shows since. That's a great example of showing the ruthless nature of Vito Corleone's character, despite sort of the loving and nurturing qualities that we see at Connie's wedding. Another great example of character and story development is in Michael's character, where we transition from this youthful, innocent character. Particularly once Vito Corleone has been shot, we see this transition to some of the more darker and evil aspects in his character, especially in the hospital where he's talking to his dad, talking about how much he loves him. and doing whatever it takes to protect him. So those are a couple of great examples of how every scene serves a specific purpose and motive within the story. But we'll start with you, Brian. In terms of the way Francis Ford Coppola, directs the movie, did you get the sense that there was any redundancy in the scenes that were included in the movie, or did you get the sense this was we're watching sort of the master at work here in terms of the scenes and sort of the editing as well that was put together in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There aren't really any scenes that I wanted to see cut out of the movie, despite its 3-hour runtime. Which is especially fascinating considering they did cut so much of this movie.
Sure.
It all just kind of flows like weirdly compellingly together from one scene to another, especially when like you have so many like disparate stories and characters happening all at the same time. And before I forget, a couple things you mentioned back there, I got a couple fun facts for you. Again, based on my deep dive into The Godfather to try to round out my education. That was a real horse head.
That's right, yeah, it was.
Which I would never have guessed, and that had a lot of people very upset at this movie. So that's extra horrifying. But and in regards to Fontaine, allegedly, according to what I was reading, he's not based on Sinatra.
Oh, is it not?
Well, it's widely assumed that he was, but I think like Puzo and Coppola said, not really.
Oh,
but Sinatra did not appreciate the connection, and like once confronted Puzo and just like screamed at him and threatened him. And so whether or not it actually is based on Sinatra, just everyone's belief that it is just enough to infuriate him. But yeah, to get back to the directing, because this is such like a character motivated movie, Coppola does a really excellent job of just like letting the understated performances like take center stage and take control. And like there's not a lot of like flashy work. It's just like really subtly emphasizing everything you need to know about Michael and Vito.
Jerome, in terms of the direction of the movie, did you get a similar impression to myself in terms of how you felt there was no redundancy in terms of the scenes that were in the movie, or did you feel there were a couple of scenes or moments that you felt that could have been cut out and tightened up a bit in terms of the editing department, for example?
No, I think the editing, in all honesty, like, and I'll talk about the direction in a second, but I think the editing is probably the best part of the entire film. Like, if this had been edited by at all someone who was inferior to the editor that they had, I think that this wouldn't be a film that we look back on and want to keep watching almost like 40 years later. Is it 40 yet?
50? Yeah, 40, 50 years.
Nearly 50 now.
Yeah. Nearly 50. It's 48 years later. So I think that the editing is really what makes this film. I think the directing also is amazing, especially because like the cinematography at the time was revolutionary. Like no one had shot stuff that dark before. Like there were shadows before. I mean, film noir came, but very few people were willing to just like completely obscure the main actor's face and let the shadows speak to what it was. And Coppola played a part in that. Gordon, the Prince of Darkness, also played a huge part in that, and the fact that he was willing to go that dark. But I remember learning that Coppola had to push for any zooms because Gordon didn't want any. There were supposed to be no zooms according to the cinematographer, and Coppola pushed for that like opening iconic zoom when we're zooming in on Brando, that zoom when we're zooming in on Pacino. He's like, I just need these few. Everything else you'll get your way, but this is what I need. So having that director's push really worked. And I'd also say Coppola was kind of in a situation where he had to like, this had to be his best movie ever because he had just failed on The Rain People, and his production company was $500,000 in debt because of George Lucas's THX 1138 or whatever the numbers are for that film. Like, he was in trouble and he needed to make sure he dug his way out. So he had to become the best director he could on this, and he did it.
Further expanding upon the direction of the movie, more specifically the cinematography by Gordon Willis, is one of my favorite aspects of the movie. Jerome, you touched upon it earlier. It's way ahead of its time in terms of the way the film was shot and lit, particularly the contrast between the high key and low key lighting and playing with the shadows and lights and whatnot. Gordon Willis said himself he wanted to go for a sepia yellow tone, as he put it, and countless filmmakers, particularly David Fincher, would replicate that in their films. A sort of saturated yellow tone, playing with the shadows that we see in many of his works nowadays. But it's so important because playing with the lights means the lighting and the shadows means that we get interesting psychological looks into the characters, particularly between the good and evil aspects of each character. One aspect that a particular scene rather that really plays with the lighting is the scene where Vito sends his enforcer Luca Brasi to infiltrate Sollozzo and the Tattaglia family to get some information out of them, and the scene where one of the henchmen effectively garrotes him, he kind of strangles him to death. It's really iconic because we see the highlighting, the bright lights shining on Luca Brasi's face. It's almost Coppola's way of telling the audience you have to experience the pain that he's going through in that moment, and it's really it's gut-wrenching at the best of times. And in that particular scene, we also see the low-key lighting, the use of shadows that plays onto the Tattaglia's face as well as Sollozzo's face, showing the cold, steely nature of these characters. So it was so revolutionary, so ahead of its time. And I think playing with the lighting effects and also with the shadows as well, it really informs you of the characters. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier about Pacino's performance, the less is more technique, where you're doing a lot by doing almost very little in many ways. But we'll start with you, Brian, in terms of the cinematography. Did you think it was as revolutionary as critics and audiences say, or did you get a differing impression when you watched it for the first time?
No, I mean, it's a gorgeous film to look at. Jerome, you brought up the cinematographer's Prince of Darkness nickname earlier, and it is well earned. He, pretty famously, when the first Prince of the movie came out, the studio was like, "This is a mistake. Why is everything so dark? What went wrong?" And Coppola and what was the cinematographer's name? I'm drawing a blank.
Gordon Willis.
Gordon Willis. Yeah, and the two of them just had to flat out refuse to allow it to be lightened, and it works so well. Everything from hiding the characters' motivations to just emphasizing the awfulness that's happening versus a lot of the back dealings, when they're deciding to go and kill the mafia head and the corrupt cop. They everything is shrouded in shadow, and you're really understanding the darkness that is creeping into these men. And every time there's a scene of violence, it's super well lit, and it forces the audience to confront what's happening, and they're not allowed to look away from everything from Luca Brasi being strangled to Sonny being gunned down in his car at the toll booth. It's such a masterclass in lighting and staging that that absolutely lives up to the hype for this movie.
Jerome, in terms of your thoughts on the cinematography, I know you touched upon it earlier, but did you feel that with its iconic nature and obviously with the weight of expectation that this movie had, do you think that the movie delivers in the cinematography side of things, or what also just your overall impressions on that side of the movie, as it were?
I mean, I think so, just because so many things clearly borrow from this afterwards. This became textbook. This is something that you watch in film school, and then you go try to emulate and see how poorly you can make it. And this guy was being really specific with all of the lights that he was using. I think the thing that was most interesting to me, especially with what you were just saying, Brian, was about how well lit it is. Because nowadays, when I'm on a set and I hear somebody talking about something being well lit, I think people who don't work in the movies usually think about that as pretty. Whereas that scene with Luca Brasi, the lighting is so harsh on his face, you can see the hot spots on him, it looks ugly, and it should look ugly because we're watching a man die. But it's so, I think that because it was willing to be ugly and because it was willing to not emphasize that, oh, these actors are beautiful people, although I mean, how do you hide that with Pacino? Everything worked out. And everything was so well thought out and willing to just go, oh, we're in the underworld, so we should probably look like these people are not good people. They should look like they're hiding things all the time. And the top-down lighting, the way that everything is like so expertly shot and everyone has to be in the place that they're in or the blocking's not going to work. It's wonderful cinematography and direction.
The final topic that we'll be discussing in the video is the soundtrack. So the composer for the movie is, of course, Nino Rota. The soundtrack is so iconic, it's so memorable, and it's loved by critics and audiences alike. As a huge film score fan, as many viewers will know from my previous videos, it's one of my favourite scores of all time. And I think the reason why is because the movie has thematic musical material. I feel like the score itself and the movie as a whole is a throwback to a bygone era in cinema where we used to hear a lot of music that played throughout the movie where the characters had their own themes, and there was title themes that had that ran throughout the movie. And I think the movie itself develops 2 or 3 iconic themes that run throughout the movie. The first one being the main title, the Godfather, the waltz, as it were, which we'll hear pretty much at the beginning of the movie. You know, once we hear those opening notes, it's even non-film fans will recognise that that's the music from the Godfather because it's just that iconic. And it kind of conveys a lot of the themes that are within the movie. You know, family, loyalty, power, corruption. It's all, you can almost hear those themes present in that theme. But one of my favourite themes, not only within the movie but pretty much of all time, is the love theme that plays appropriately when Michael is in exile in Sicily, in Italy. You can definitely hear the authentic Italian culture and sort of the various themes that run in the movie. You can hear it in the music pretty much from start to finish. It's such a romantic melody, almost reminiscent of a lot of romantic films where you'd almost hear it in a romantic comedy, for example, when the couple get together, for example, and first meet. It's got that sort of melody to it. But overall, I mean, I love the soundtrack. You know, it would further be developed in, you know, The Godfather Part 2, where, you know, he expanded upon the themes that were in the first movie, and obviously the third movie as well, which we won't mention because I'm not a big fan of the third movie. That's another topic for another day. But we'll start with you, Jerome. In terms of the soundtrack, do you feel it's as iconic and as memorable as people make it out to be? And what's your overall impressions of the soundtrack?
I mean, I think that then was definitely the time when soundtracks were taking the most risks. So it paid off, especially because the film, like those songs originating from the film and like the music being the first thing you really hear before you see anything, it all works really, really well. I think my favorite thing about the soundtrack, though, is just like how it kind of shows Coppola's nepotism, because he also had his son composing on it. Like,
that's right.
And that just, I mean, The Godfather could be subtitled how Francis Ford Coppola tries to get all of his family into the movie industry. But I think that all of it works really well. Just like hearing the Godfather theme throughout the film. I think the romance theme as well is very interesting because I don't believe it reoccurs in Godfather 2.
I think we hear it once, but yeah, it doesn't recur for most things.
Yeah, it's just very much so isolated to that time in Italy. And I think that that's probably for the best, but also such an interesting thing because it's like the happiest moment in the film is when Michael no longer has to like be with his family, even though he's still having to deal with his problems. And then once he comes back, it's kind of just downhill from there, according to the soundtrack. But I like that.
Brian, in terms of your thoughts on the soundtrack, do you agree with myself and Jerome in terms of just how iconic and memorable the soundtrack is, or are you one of the few people that don't like the soundtrack and have a different opinion in terms of that aspect of the movie?
I feel like I'm being looked to be the dissenter here, the hot take guy. No, the soundtrack is obviously incredible and iconic, and out of all the whole parts of the discussion, this is probably the one that I'm least qualified to talk about, as I know so little about music. But I think my favorite part of the soundtrack is like how it creates like such distinct like feelings for Michael's character specifically. Like we've touched on, how like happy the score is when he's in Italy, and his arc is tracked really well musically. Like we go from him like he doesn't have a ton of music afforded to him early in the movie, as he's kind of just like this background role as the family tries to move on with their business, while letting him be separate, until once he agrees to go and kill Sollozzo and McCluskey. He then start to finally like get his own themes and have like his character ingrained into the sound of this world, which I think you're right. Like the happiest it feels is him in Italy or Sicily, whichever it is he's in, and he like for a little while, like the soundtrack lets us believe that everything's gonna be okay before. You're right. It's all downhill, and it's just like we start like mirroring musically how the score treated Vito to how it begins to treat Michael.
So going into the final aspect of the discussion, so we're just going to give our overall thoughts. So I'll kick things off. In terms of my summary of the movie itself, I think it's starting with the story and the screenplay. It's so multi-layered, so multifaceted. Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola do a great job of adapting the source material into the movie. I think it's so important to understand that they're two different mediums, and understanding what works in a book necessarily doesn't work in the movie. And they do a great job of cherry-picking the best elements of the book and picking what works for the big screen, as it were. And I think the screenplay and the story does a great job of being authentic to Italian culture, and certainly paying respect to the mafia culture, despite sort of the bad connotations that come with that side of the mafia, as it were. They do a great job of honouring it and doing it, of essentially conveying the mafia in a very realistic way that we hadn't really seen prior to The Godfather. Up until then, mafia movies had been giving sort of stereotypical versions of what the gangster, quote-unquote gangster, looked like. But The Godfather does a great job of giving you an honest, realistic depiction, as real as it can be, I suppose, within a Hollywood film. In terms of the acting, stellar across the board. Everyone is great in their roles. As I said before, one of the best ensemble casts in a history of movies. Marlon Brando, so quotable, so iconic in his role. His method style of acting is there for all to see. Al Pacino, my favourite performance in the movie. He's given the best character arc, in my opinion, from this young, innocent guy to all of a sudden becoming the ruthless leader of his family. And in terms of the direction of the movie, it's top-notch from start to finish. Coppola knows that every scene is important to the film itself in terms of either furthering the story or furthering the characters. So at no point do you feel that there's any redundancy in the scenes that are within the movie, and they serve a specific purpose and a specific motive as well. Cinematography is so iconic from Gordon Willis. It paved the way for so many filmmakers like David Fincher in terms of that yellow colour palette and the use of saturated colours in terms of playing with the shadows and high key lighting and low key lighting as well, which it's so important in terms of the storytelling device in Godfather, in terms of showing the psychological developments within the various characters in the movie. And finally, with the soundtrack, as I said before, I'm a huge film score fan. Nino Rota is one of my favourite composers. The first few notes that we hear from the opening moments of Godfather, you know straight away it's the waltz, the main title theme. It's so iconic, so memorable. And my favourite theme in the movie being the love theme, very much a romantic ballad in terms of how it's presented within the movie. It's so well drawn out, and I think thematic music material is something that we don't see enough in movies nowadays. I think we should go back to that era in terms of playing with thematic material if filmmakers give the composers the opportunity. Back to point in terms of The Godfather, overall, based on the points that I've mentioned, it gets a perfect 10 out of 10 out of me in terms of the score. Perfect across the board, and it definitely deserves its place as one of the greatest movies of all time, not within the gangster genre, but across all movies. So we'll start with you, Jerome, just in terms of your overall thoughts, and then giving it a rating on a scale of 1 to 10.
Overall thoughts, I think that it's definitely like they turned that book into something amazing. I think, having read the book, I really enjoyed it. I'm very happy with what they did with like the source material to adapt it, and I think that Coppola was definitely the right choice. Great writing, great directing, the acting. It has some of the best actors that really kind of got their careers kicked off by this film, like James Caan. This was what kind of promoted him to starhood. And then in terms of cinematography, I mean, it influences everything that's come after it. Once it came out, everything knew, oh, we have to kind of look like The Godfather at some point. And I think overall I'd probably give it an 8.5 because like I really enjoy the film and it's so influential that it definitely deserves a high score, but I think that there are just a few moments within it that they don't live up to Godfather Part 2. Like that film just blows this one out of the water for me. So to give it like a 9 or above would be way too much. And the only thing that I'll say about it is I think Mario Puzo got took in terms of how much they paid him for this like adaptation. In total, he made $90,000, and that's so much less than everybody else made, and it's a shame.
Brian, just in terms of your overall thoughts, it'd be interesting to hear that, since it's obviously the first time you've seen the movie, and you're raising on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, so this was the first time that I'd seen The Godfather, and there are moments that lived up to the hype, and there are moments that didn't. As I have now, I'm going to say notoriously not loved Brando's performance. Again, I don't think it's bad, just not amazing. But I think for me the most memorable and the most interesting part of this movie is Michael's arc. And so having not seen The Godfather Part 2, that immediately sounds like a more interesting movie to me, of like mirroring his further rise to power with his father's initial rise. And as someone who pretty much solely has a writing background, it's like that kind of like character work that draws me most into movies. And so if I'm gonna give scores here, obviously like it is an iconic movie that has earned its place in film history, and it's like Jerome said, it's hard to give it a low score on anything because it is like so well crafted, like across the board. So I think the lowest score I might give being the acting and characters is like an 8.5. Like the direction, the soundtrack are a 10 in my mind. I give the story a 9. Although maybe somewhat paradoxically, I think I'm gonna go with an overall score of an 8, which is if we're doing math here, is not how math works. But it's obvious. It's a very important movie for film history for a number of reasons. It's rightfully taught in film school for people to study and emulate. Though I mean, I can't say for certain, having just watched it for the first time a couple days ago, but a lot of the movie doesn't feel like something that's going to stick with me as much as other movies that I've loved. But I'm interested to see how my feelings on this movie change over time, whether it grows or kind of like is forgotten. And I'm definitely interested to see how I feel about the sequel when I get around to it.
Just before we close the discussion in terms of what we've discussed today, I'll give you just a quick reminder of my social media channels. So if you want to get updates on the latest movie blog articles, you can follow me on Twitter at town_Hollywood, Instagram hollywood.town, and the same profile username for Facebook as well. If you want to follow my website, it's hollywoodtown.weebly.com. So my Twitter and Instagram and Facebook profiles will have the website link, so if you want to follow that, you're more than welcome to. And my newly created YouTube channel called Hollywood Town. So I'm doing discussions with fellow movie blog fans such as Jerome and Brian. So if you want to keep up with the latest videos, you can hit the notification bell for updates on the latest videos. And if you enjoy the video, you can hit the like and subscribe buttons. So I'll pass it over to Jerome now. Just a quick reminder to the folks watching in terms of where they can follow you, in terms of your social media platforms. And then, Brian can follow suit.
All right, you can follow my company at Amateur Overlords on Instagram or Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Amateur Jerome. And anything to plug, just new comic book coming out next month. And I got a friend dropping a short film tomorrow, Affair by Tall Order Productions. They're on Instagram.
And then,
Brian.
Brian.
Okay. Jumped the gun on the social plugs in the last segment on here, but I'll give them again. So you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Frosty. Frosty spelled with an I because very Italian. My blog that I mentioned earlier, Movies on Trial, can be found on Facebook and Twitter at Movies on T. And feel free to jump in and read my thoughts on lots of other movies. It's been dormant for a little while, but should be making a comeback fairly soon. And yeah, we'll have a short film coming out at some point if the pandemic ever stops. We're supposed to start filming sometime in June, but that obviously hasn't happened. But when it does, you can find me on Twitter, where I will be begging everyone to watch it.
Awesome. Yep. Be sure to follow Jerome and Brian, guys. They're doing some great stuff at the minute. So yeah, be sure to follow them. I'm a huge fan of what they're doing at the minute in terms of their work. So yeah, be sure to follow them. But yeah, it was a blast speaking to you, Jerome and Brian. Love these get-together discussions on the various movies that we discuss. And look forward to the next one, guys.
Yeah, man, it was a ton of fun.
Peace.